with your host, PGA professional and teacher to the stars, Jim Beckett, and operations manager for the Links of Spruce Creek South, Darren Irwin, right here on The Source.
All right, 4.5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Thursday morning. 16 hours ago, there was a story released in the press by the Business Insider, and the headline reads, "Here's the evidence that convinced a Louisiana man his dad was the Zodiac Killer." Now, this has kind of been in the news the last couple of weeks, and we have on the phone Gary L. Stewart. He is the man that we're referring to. His book is called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer. Holy mackerel. Does that, I mean, what a story here. Gary L. Stewart. Good morning, Gary. How you doing?
Good morning, Larry. I'm fine. How are you?
Pretty good. Where are you right now?
I'm in Baton Rouge, not too far from you guys.
That's a nice place. I like that area. So you own a cleaning company, is that right?
We have an industrial service company that does chemical cleaning in the refineries and petrochemical facilities along the Gulf Coast.
Right. Okay. And as a child, did you not know who your father was?
No, absolutely not. You know, I was raised in an adoptive home, and I was certainly not the only adoptive child in the Stewart family, but my adoptive parents were very honest with us kids growing up, that told us we were adopted before we even knew what the word adoption meant.
Okay,
and
right.
Yeah, so no way of knowing anything about the biological parents.
Oh my goodness. And so may I ask how old you are now?
Sure. Everybody knows now. I'm 51 years old.
Everybody knows. All right, so at one point you decided you wanted to know who your biological father was, right?
Yeah, in fact, you know, it's funny you make that comment. My grandson was looking at my picture on the book, and he says, "You look a lot younger in that picture." It's like amazing what writing a book will do for you.
Oh, that's too funny. So tell us what happened here, and how far back does this go? When did you say, you know what, I want to figure out who my biological dad is, right?
I always wanted to know, but, you know, in Louisiana, adoptions have been closed since the 70s, so even if I wanted to search when RootsWeb, genealogy, Ancestry.com became popular, I didn't even have a name to start with. So I always wanted to know. But at 39 years of age, back when I looked younger, and 12 years ago, my biological mother came searching for me. And
oh, you didn't even know your biological mother?
I didn't know. Absolutely not. I didn't have a clue.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought you were with her. Okay. Oh, wow.
I spent the first 39 years of my life with my adoptive parents and my adopted sister, and then they had another miracle child come along 3 years after they adopted me. So, great way to grow up. But certainly, Mother's Day, Saturday before Mother's Day, 2002, when my biological mother contacted my adoptive parents, was certainly one of the most incredible, thrilling days of my life. I immediately flew out to San Francisco to meet her and asked her, so Mom, who was my dad? And she told me the story, and it's when I began to think, wow, what an incredible story, that she was only 14 when they met and married in San Francisco, and he was twice her age. And of course, it was an illicit love affair, and so they were on the run for love. Ended up in New Orleans, broke, desperate, and I was born. And at 4 weeks of age, my father took me by train to Baton Rouge, and he left me in a stairwell landing in an apartment building there and walked away.
Oh.
And my mother didn't know the entirety of the story at the time, but she told me when he came back home from Baton Rouge without me that she left him immediately. And so he turned her in as a runaway from California, a juvenile runaway from California. So she turned him in for abandoning her baby. They were both apprehended. They signed relinquishment papers, and 1 month after that, I was able to be taken out of foster care and placed for adoption.
Oh my goodness.
Gosh.
And of course, you're just a baby. This is not even in your memory, right?
Right.
This is something you had to learn later on. Wow. But you didn't know that until you met your mom in San Francisco?
Right. And I, so after meeting her and finding out this story, I think, I don't think I want to know this guy. I don't really want to know my father.
Did she tell you his name at that time?
She said, honey, it's been a long time, but I think his name was Van. And that's all she told me. And I said, I only know maybe one or two other Vans in my entire list of friends and acquaintances. Thought it's a pretty cool name, but I don't want to know any more about this guy. And it took 6 months before the curiosity ever got to me. And later that year, I said, I just have to know. And I would like to hear his side of the story. And in reality, no matter what he did or or why he did what he did to me, I want to thank him for leaving me in Baton Rouge to where I could be adopted by the Stewart family.
Yeah. Well, and just to talk about the Stewart family just for a moment here, because we're focusing on your biological parents, but obviously the bulk of the blessings from family comes from the Stewart family.
Absolutely. And my book is such a unique story. Jeff Gwynn from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram made a comment that it's really not in a true crime genre. It's really not in just a memoir. It's a unique new genre of its own that truly is my heart-wrenching 12-year discovery, fully 1/5 of my life, to find out who I am by looking for my biological father.
So remind me, that when did you start the research? Was it 12 years ago? What?
Yeah, my mother contacted me 12 years ago,
okay.
And so I finally told her I wanted to find my father, and my mother, 11 years after her life with me and my father, she got on with her life, and she happened to marry the first ever African American homicide inspector in the San Francisco Police Department.
Wow.
So twist of fate or whatever. So when I asked her to help me find my father, she knew exactly where to go. Now her husband had passed away by then in 98, and she contacted me in 2002. But her husband was a mentor to many people on the force and in the San Francisco Police Department. So she went to his friends and a couple of the guys, including the chief of police at the time, and said, my son, Gary, wants to find his biological father. Can you help him? And they both said, well, Judy, we didn't even know you had another son. But they started looking, and shortly they came back with his file. And they said, they gave me a name, Earl Van Best Jr. They gave me his date of birth, place of birth, social security number. But they indicated to my mother, be warned, there are things in Gary's father's file that we will not share with you. And that didn't deter me one bit. I didn't care what was in that file. I just wanted to track this man down and extend that forgiveness and that thanks for allowing me to become a Stewart. And hopefully I was going to find him alive, right? I know my mother was only 15 years older than me. My father was a little older, but I was only 40 at the time. So, So I started my search, and every lead I ran down, every possibility, every rock that I overturned, just led me to learn more about my father. But I would hit a roadblock occasionally and ask my mother, will you please tell your friends to let me know what's in that file? I even found out that my father was deceased, died in 1984, and was buried in Mexico City, and that he had 3 other siblings who he had absolutely no contact with and had abandoned. And they were living in Vienna, Austria. I found them and wanted to have a relationship with them, but the quality of the information that I provided to them was so poor because the information I was getting from the San Francisco Police Department wasn't all that, and it was interfering with me establishing a relationship with my siblings.
So they didn't believe you? Is that what the problem was?
Yeah, they wanted proof. They wanted,
so did they know that your dad was the Zodiac Killer?
No, they.
And at this point, did you know? At that point, did you know that he was the Zodiac Killer?
Absolutely not.
No, not yet. Okay.
They didn't either. But my mother did go back to the SFPD one last time and says, you know what, guys? I don't care what he did. Please tell me what's in Gary's father's file. They told my mother, Judy, you need to have Gary drop this. What's in his file, his father's file, is so heinous that it would destroy him and you. And by the way, what's in that file would make what his father did to you and Gary seem inconsequential. My father used to lock me in a Foot Locker with the lid closed when I was 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, because he said he couldn't stand to hear it cry.
Oh, man.
So at that point I dropped it. In April of 2004, I dropped it. And one day, 3 months later, July 31st, 2004, I was watching an A&E cold case special on the Zodiac Killer, and when the wanted sketch from the SFPD from 1969 popped up on the screen, my heart stopped. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My son walks in the room. He says, "Hey, Dad, it's you on TV."
Oh,
my God.
No.
I go to my office, and the San Francisco Police Department had provided me with what they called an old DMV photograph. An old driver's license picture, right? Back in the 60s. I framed that thing and had it on top of my desk as I researched trying to track my father down. That was my inspiration. I have to meet this man. That photograph would later be found out to be that it was the 1962 mugshot of my father for statutory rape of my mother.
Oh.
Mm.
I pulled that photograph, went out, and went back in the living room and showed my son. I said, "No, Zach, it's not me. It's my father."
Oh, wow. His grandfather.
Yes.
Okay, so now, what do you do? Oh, so
now,
I want you to. Could you do me a favor? And
Yep.
Because I don't know that everybody knows the Zodiac Killer. So let's just kind of veer from your story just for a moment. What did the Zodiac Killer do? Why was he called the Zodiac Killer? At what period of time did this take place?
From the late 1960s to the mid-1970s, the Zodiac Killer terrorized the residents of California in a very similar fashion as did Jack the Ripper in the late 1800s in London. Excuse me. And I believe he was a copycat of Jack the Ripper, because he would, after he did his crimes, he would taunt the authorities. He would send taunting letters to the newspapers and the police, and to this day still remains America's most notorious, infamous, still at large serial killer.
Still at large. So he's not really buried in Mexico City?
Well, he's still at large because the authorities have not acknowledged that the case is closed, or the case is solved. But my hope is in presenting my story, my evidence, that's going to change things.
And where does the Zodiac Park come? Where does the name Zodiac Killer come from?
There's all sorts of speculation. I don't think anyone will ever be able to answer that definitively. It was just a signature, and but once I saw that picture, that wanted sketch, I immediately set out to disprove my theory. And that evening, I emailed my. Yeah, absolutely. That's the last thing I would ever want to believe, right? That my father, my biological father, could have done these things. I emailed the police officer in San Francisco, as well as my mother, and I said, "Okay, now I understand what was so heinous and why you wouldn't share this with me. If I get on an airplane and fly to San Francisco tomorrow, will you sit down with me and let's discuss this?" I never heard back from the officer in Internal Affairs at the SFPD again. My mother says, "Oh, honey, I certainly hope this is not the case, but there is so much information out there on the internet, I just don't know if we can be sure." The sergeant in Internal Affairs did email my mother back, or contact my mother and say, "No, Judy, no worries. Gary's father certainly wasn't the Zodiac Killer. That case is closed and has been solved. We know who it was. It was a guy who died 10 years ago. His name was Arthur Lee Allen." Well, anybody that knows anything about the Zodiac case, that was SFPD's and the Bay Area's prime suspect forever and ever. And the subject of Robert Graysmith, the cartoonist from the Chronicle from the 60s, 2 books, and David Fincher's 2007 feature film called Zodiac. However, the guy has not been proven to be the Zodiac Killer.
Oh, wow. So, okay, so are you sure? I guess at this point, the question would be, are you sure that your father is the Zodiac Killer?
Absolutely. So from that night, I spent the next 10 years trying to disprove my biggest fear. And over time, everything I discovered proved that my father had means, opportunity, and motivation, which is the one thing that none of the Zodiac suspects so far in the 48-year history of the case have ever provided a legitimate, valid motivation. I've done that with this story. It is very clear, and I have laid out evidence that has never before been seen in this case, and there's no doubt in my mind.
So, what was the name of the suspect that they said was they figured out who it was?
Arthur Lee Allen.
Lee Allen. Okay.
And so what I did, I eventually getting ignored by my mother's friends in the SFPD. I found out that the case was closed, but it wasn't solved. And if anybody had any tips or any credible leads, please contact Lieutenant John Hennessy, head of homicide at the SFPD. And I did just that, and I called him, and I said, Lieutenant Hennessy, I'm a guy from Baton Rouge, and I just got a question for you. Has the Zodiac case been solved? And his first reaction was a laugh. He said, absolutely not. So I said, well, look, I've got a story if you care to listen. I shared my story. He asked me to write down, summarize my story, and send it to him. And within a couple of weeks, we were back on the phone. He says, look, very compelling information. Next time you're in San Francisco, please stop by the Hall of Justice and come see me. And I did. And the evidence I presented was so compelling, he went against the grain and chose to take my DNA, swab me, and spend the money to have that test run.
Oh, wow.
And to be compared to the sample they have on file for the Zodiac Killer.
And
nearly a year later, after he had said, we have a current backlog of years for current cases, so yours is going to take a back burner. But trust me, Gary, we are going to do this so you have closure for you and your family. He emailed me out of the blue and said, Gary, I've got the crime lab director to agree to do this. Again, be patient. It's going to take a little more time. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to have that closure once and for all. And I confidently and naively, I told my mother that I don't have to worry about your friends in the SFPD anymore. The head of homicide has taken me seriously and is going to run my DNA. The next thing I know, Lieutenant Hennessy stops communicating with me. He has moved out of homicide to special investigations. He will not return a phone call or an email. When this man, I'm telling you, knew my family history, I knew his family history. We spoke on weekends at times just because we had gone from acquaintances to, I think, friends and trusted confidants. So I think what happened is my mother went to her friend in internal affairs and said, look, Gary has gone around us, and I think he confronted Hennessy and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? The case is closed. We're not supposed to spend any dollars on this. And so maybe, and that's all speculation, but maybe, you know what? You don't say a thing, never talk to the guy again, we'll make this go away.
Wow.
And the San Francisco Police Department responded to my co-author's official request for my father's file, stating that my father's file has since been destroyed or purged.
Well, it's not going away. The story that I opened up this interview with was from the Business Insider from, what did I say, 16 hours ago?
Yeah.
I mean, this was just released. This was released at 5:43 p.m. on May 28th. Today's the 29th.
Yeah.
So this is a brand new story. It's evidence that convinced a Louisiana man his dad was the Zodiac Killer. I mean, it's in today's news.
Right.
And then it goes through a list of things that are listed as pieces of evidence that they say. It says the evidence in Stewart's book is circumstantial, and police didn't appear to be looking at Best as a suspect in the killings, but Stewart is still convinced, and then here's why. And it goes through a number of bullet points as to why, one of them being a fingerprint.
Right. Yeah, no one really knows in the general public if any of the authorities, the Vallejo Police Department, Napa Police Department, San Francisco Police Department, if any one of these jurisdictions actually has true fingerprints from the Zodiac Killer, right? But I found on the San Francisco Police Department evidence that they had some prints, and these prints were made in blood. They were smeared in blood, but one of the prints that is alleged to be from the Zodiac Killer had a very noticeable scar on an index finger. I was able to secure my father's rap sheet, not his manual handwritten file, typewritten file from the 60s, but his electronic rap sheet from not only the FBI, but from the CLEATS system, which is California Law Enforcement Computer System. And I've got his fingerprints. And my father has a noticeable scar on his index finger, and we had a forensic fingerprint examiner take a look at the two and says the scars match.
And since they said in the beginning about the DNA that they would be willing to test yours, can't they exhume the body of this Arthur Lee Allen and extract DNA from him to match whatever they have?
Yeah.
Actually, they were smarter than that. They so wanted to nail Arthur Lee Allen that they had the medical examiner preserve a slice of his brain material when he passed away, hoping that one day DNA forensic science would progress enough to be able to do something like this, and they've done the comparison, and his did not match. So. Now the SFPD, according to an interview I did with Kevin Fagan of the San Francisco Chronicle last week, he says the SFPD new crime lab director has said that they are not at all confident in the integrity of the alleged DNA partial profile that they have from the Zodiac Killer, due to the fact that these letters and these envelopes that they extracted the DNA from, at one time, were taken home by officers to share with their kids and their family over the dinner table. I mean, what better discussion piece, right? Take it out, let your child go to show and tell at school with it. So who knows whose DNA is on those samples that they've provided? So they're not confident in that. I don't know where I stand. All I know is in 2003, when they established that profile, they were extremely confident in their sample. And in 2004, when Lieutenant Hennessy swabbed me, he was extremely confident with me that he could use that DNA to exclude or include my father as
wow, what a fascinating story. Gary L. Stewart, again, is our guest. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but we're talking about the Zodiac Killer, who he has good reason to believe is his biological father. Never really knew him, and if he is, it would be I'm trying to remember the name, Earl Van Best Jr. The book that details all of this that Gary wrote is called "The Most Dangerous Animal of All: Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer." And there was one question I had in the article that I was reading from this morning, the Business Insider. There's a woman who says in 2009, a California woman claimed that her father was the Zodiac Killer. She actually helped send letters from the killer that appeared. Is she referring to the same man that you are? Is she your half-sister or something? Or?
Oh, no, that's Deborah Perez. She came out with a statement in 2009 saying that she helped, as a child, she helped write the Zodiac letters. Right. She also said that her real father was her stepdad or something. She also said that her real father was John F. Kennedy. So people dismissed her story, and she's never been heard from since.
Okay. And did the Zodiac Killer target prostitutes, or am I not right about that?
No, it was good question. Thanks for asking, Larry. It was couples in lovers' lanes who most of them resembled my mother. And it was all about my father being shattered by his father and mother's divorce. He looked up to his father. He admired his father. His father was a code decipherer for the military, and so he targeted females.
Gary, we have only about 30 seconds. Have you ever seen the movie Scoop by Woody Allen?
I have.
I think he took this story and made it his own.
Yes.
I think he did. His is the Tarot Card Killer or something.
Yeah.
All right, let me say goodbye. And real quickly, what's your website?
Website is www.themostdangerousanimalofall.com. The book can be found at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all your booksellers.
Thank you, Gary. Great interview.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Our economy in the first quarter doing something it hasn't done in years.
The U.S. economy shrank for the first time since 2011. That is not good news. But the hopes here is that there is pent-up demand and that we will begin to see that in purchases and the like.
Nicole Pedalides with the Fox Business Network on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Applications for first-time jobless help last week dropping to a 7-year low. And the head of the VA under more pressure to step down after the latest findings.
A late-night hearing following the release of an inspector general's initial findings of the VA, concluding inappropriate scheduling practices are system-wide, and in Phoenix, where this scandal first broke, still persistent.
Can you look in the eyes of these families and say, I accept this responsibility?
Indiana Republican Jackie Walorski.
Fox Radio's Jared Halpern. Fox News. We report, you decide.
There is something about the road that beckons, that invites us to pack up the family and leave the world behind. And there is something about an industry-leading unlimited mileage warranty on a certified pre-owned Mercedes-Benz that gives us the freedom to do exactly that. You take to the highway, rack up the miles for up to 3 years, and drive with the assurance that your Mercedes-Benz is covered.